Hey there, it's Dino, and I got a new example I want to show you. This is Apigee API proxies connecting to a Cloud Run service with authentication. 4 different ways. I put this together to answer some questions that I've been getting from different people. I wanted to just explore it a little bit. So this proxy uses 4 different approaches, demonstrates 4 different approaches. The first is, let me just take a step back. The Cloud Run service is going to be deployed so that it requires authentication, which means the caller, in this case, it's going to be an Apigee API proxy, must pass an authorization header, and that header needs to contain an identity token. The proxy is going to show 4 different approaches for doing that. First is a pass-through. The call into the Apigee proxy must bring the authorization header. Apigee doesn't do anything, it just relays that header. All right, so that's one option. The second is platform authentication, where Apigee, the call into Apigee doesn't carry on any authentication, but Apigee itself automatically obtains an identity token for that Cloud Run service. And I'll show you what that looks like. The third is impersonation, where we can use a service callout policy inside Apigee to obtain an identity token that is useful for that Cloud Run service and inject it into the upstream request. And finally, what I'll call indirect authentication, where the proxy actually uses a downloaded service account key file to obtain an identity token. Doesn't use impersonation necessarily, but it does use the service account key file and then uses the identity token it can obtain with that key file for use with the upstream service. So 4 different ways to do it. This sample is something that you can try. To use it, you need Bash, gcloud, a couple other Unix utilities. You can get all that in Google Cloud Shell, or it should run on a Linux machine or a Mac OS. Sorry, I don't have a Windows example. This project, I didn't really explore exactly which permissions you need. You need the Secret Manager API. You need Apigee, obviously. You need Cloud Run to be enabled in a project. Probably a few other things that I'm not thinking of. Um, it's easiest if you're owner or editor. I didn't kind of map out exactly what you need. So to run through this, I'm going to do it really quickly. Let's just follow the steps. First thing we got to do is edit the environment file and set up some settings for ourselves. So this environment file looks like this in the repo. You set up some things for Apigee, the project ID, the environment, a contrived name for a service account. This short name can be anything you like. We'll just clean that up later. This is the host for your Apigee environment group, and then a contrived name for the secret, which again can be anything. It'll get cleaned up later. Also, we have some settings for the Cloud Run project. Maybe a separate project, doesn't have to be, but it works best if it is because it kind of illustrates the point. So separate Cloud Run project, a service name, which you can probably keep the same. The Cloud Run service region, you can pick whatever you want. And then a contrived name for, short name for the service account in that other project. And again, that can be anything you like. Just modify this environment file and set it up to be appropriate for you. I set up mine and I have it in a different file called environment private. So you want to source that, set all those environment variables. That's the kind of first step to the setup. And then we're going to deploy the Cloud Run service. So let's just grab that and we'll flip back over to the terminal and deploy the Cloud Run service. What is that doing? Well, it's really just this script is just running gcloud run deploy. It deploys from source. What is the service? Let's have a look. It's defined in this directory. It's a Node.js app. So nothing really exotic here. The main interesting thing is that it sends back a JSON payload that includes some interesting information. Probably the most interesting is some information about the caller. That is the email and sub claim extracted from the authorization header that was passed in as an ID token to this Cloud Run service. So there's going to be, Google Cloud is going to insist that the authorization header be there, and it's going to validate the ID token before allowing that call to reach the Cloud Run service. But when it does reach the Cloud Run service, it still has the authorization header. So the Cloud Run service can examine that header and do what it wants. It's already been validated. The authorization check has already been performed. All I'm doing is looking at the contents of that JWT payload, and I'm sending it back. That's just for diagnostic purposes. So just Node.js sends back a little JSON payload that includes the identity of the caller. All right. So that is step one. While that's happening, we'll kind of look at the other steps. Next things we're going to do is create a service account, first in the Apigee project and then second in the Cloud Run project. Those are very similar. They're just going to look like, again, nothing really exotic. It looks like service account creating. It's just going to call gcloud IAM service accounts create, and it's using a particular name and project for that. In this case, it's going to add a role to itself, which I'll explain later. So that's for the Apigee project, the service account for the Apigee project. And then there's another one for the Cloud Run project. Those will take care of the second and third scenarios. The second and fourth scenarios that I walk through. Remember, there's 4 different scenarios here. There's pass-through, platform, impersonation, and indirect. And the Cloud Run will be the Cloud Run service account will be used for this one. Fourth scenario, actually. The Apigee, the service account in the Apigee project will be used for the second and third scenarios. I misspoke a little bit earlier. Okay. So the Cloud Run service is up and running. Let's demonstrate that it's there and insisting on authentication by just using curl or invoke it. We're not passing any authorization header as expected. We see a 403. How do we get access to that? Well, I can do gcloud auth print identity token to get an ID token. That's a JWT. What's it look like? Let me just grab that. We'll flip over to a JWT decoder. If I paste it in here, you can see this is the payload. It was issued by accounts.google.com. It was issued just now, expires in an hour. This is who it identifies. That's my email address for this particular organization. And there's a unique subject identifier for me and so on. So just an ID token. That's what print identity token requires, and we need to pass that as an authorization, as a bearer token in the authorization header. So how do we do that? Let's grab it in a shell variable. We'll do gcloud auth print identity token. Grab that into that ID token, and then in our curl command, we'll just pass the authorization header. Okay. Oops, and I want to call status. That's the name of the endpoint that I want to call. All right, so we're actually getting back information from that Cloud Run service, and as I showed you in the code, it's telling me, okay, this is the name of the Cloud Run service. This is the revision. This is the service account that the Cloud Run service is running as, and this is just the default service account. This is the identity of the caller, the identity of the thing that passed in, that was identified by the ID token in the authorization header. So that's what we're sending back, and that's interesting. We'll use that a little bit later to kind of diagnose who's calling this Cloud Run service and so on. All right, so where are we? We should go back to this repo, and we've created the Cloud Run service. Now we need to create a couple of service accounts. So let's grab this. This is just creating a service account. That'll be really quick. I want to create the other service account in the Cloud Run project. This does take a few seconds while it grants permissions. So that's all done. While this is happening, I'll explain about this service account token creator. Basically, the impersonation scenario where the Apigee proxy is going to impersonate another service account. It's actually going to impersonate itself. But even and doing that, the way it does it is it will call into the IAM credentials endpoint for Google APIs and request an ID token for itself. The call, if you're going to do it on the command line, kind of looks like this. You have to pass in an access token and then a payload that says, here's the audience that I want for my ID token, and then invoke this endpoint, which you can do in Apigee with a service callout. But if you do that, you need the service account itself needs service account token creator permissions on itself. It needs to be able to impersonate itself, and it needs that role on itself. So that's what this prior step did. In this case, this next service account that I created is in the remote Cloud Run project. Now, it's not the service account that the Cloud Run service is running as. It's just a different service account that is in that other project. In Apigee, it is not possible to run an API proxy with a service account that um, uh, belongs to a different project. So it's only possible, if this is my Apigee project, then I have to use, if I want to run my API proxy as a service account, I have to use a service account that's in that project. But it is possible to have your API proxy adopt the identity of a remote service account, and I'm going to show you how that works in this project. All right, so what did we do? We have created the first service account, the second service account. We want to now create and download a service account key file for that remote project. And the reason is we're going to then upload that. So that's super fast. We're going to then upload that into the secret manager in the Apigee project. And that's going to allow the Apigee API proxy to retrieve that secret from secret manager at runtime while the proxy executes, so that it can then use the service account key file to assume the identity of that remote service account. That's this one. All right, so we've uploaded that in the secret manager. We need to grant permission to invoke the Cloud Run service in each case. So I'm gonna run that. Those two commands, those are just gcloud IAM commands, setting things up. So no problem there. We need to run and install Apigee CLI. I already have that, so I won't be needing that. Then we need to update the Apigee proxy with some settings from our particular environment. That is the Cloud Run URL, the secret name, and the secret version. So what do I mean by that? Apigee proxies have this thing called a properties file, and in there you can set various settings that can be accessed at runtime by the policies that execute in that API proxy. So what we want to do is just run the script that sets the URL for the Cloud Run service that we just deployed and the secret that we just created into that properties file. And that's going to be with this script number 8. And that's really easy. That's the contents of the updated properties file. So that looks all fine. The next step after that is to import and deploy that API proxy, and that'll take a few minutes. While that's happening, I kind of want to explore with you the workings of the API proxy. So let's see how it looks, how it works. So I'm going to look at the exploded API proxy configuration just on my local system. There's one proxy endpoint. It is just a pass-through. It doesn't do anything. There are no conditional flows. It doesn't do much, let's put it that way. It does a few things. The first is it checks for the existence and value of a specific header called auth type. And we're going to require always that auth type is present and is one of these well-known values, pass through, impersonate. impersonated, platform, or indirect. If not, we get a fault. And then the other interesting thing that this proxy does is it just uses a different target endpoint depending on the value of that header. So we're not routing based on path, we're routing based on header value, and it just uses one of the four different targets. So let's have a look at the targets. So the first one is pass-through. Very simple. It will use an HTTP target connection with the URL specified by this funny looking thing, which again is referring back to that property that is set in the properties file that I showed you just a little bit earlier. It doesn't inject any authorization header. So whatever header is passed in the inbound request to Apigee is going to be propagated to the upstream. That's our pass-through scenario. The second one is the platform scenario, and this I think is really neat. Inside the HTTP target connection, everything is the same except for this element is new, this authentication element, and basically it's telling Apigee, go get an ID token on behalf of the service account that this API proxy is running as, and inject that into the target upstream request. And that ID token needs a specific audience in the Cloud Run scenario. And again, we're just referring to that same URL from the properties file. So Apigee is going to get an ID token and inject it into the request automatically. I don't need any other policies. You can see it's very thin, super kind of clean way to configure that operation. So that's the second scenario, platform authentication. The third, I think, is impersonated. And this is maybe a little bit more interesting. We're using a service call out. So here below, we don't use that authentication element. So we're not adding any authorization header here in the HTTP target connection, but we're doing it manually. We're using a service call out to get the identity token from the identity and access management endpoint. So this is what it looks like. We're calling IAM credentials, specifying the service account that we want to impersonate, calling generate ID token. We need to pass in a payload, a JSON payload that has an audience and include email. So basically, the audience is again that Cloud Run service URI. You'll note that's really similar to what we were configuring in the authentication markup in the platform target. It's just that we didn't have to make the service call out explicitly when we did it that way, when we do it with the markup, but this way we have to do it explicitly. And funny thing, when calling the IAM credentials endpoint, we need an access token. So we're using a different authentication stanza here. This one says Google Access Token, not ID token. And this is going to enable the proxy to call the IAM credentials endpoint. So use an access token to get things at googleapis.com. Use an ID token to get to Cloud Run services that you might configure custom. Anyway, that's what this service callout is doing. And it's putting the result in token response. And then the next thing it'll do is grab that token response content, evaluate a JSON path, just get the token field there and stick that into the authorization header as a bearer token. So that is what we see for the second approach, which was, or the impersonated. Sorry, I think that's the third approach. So service call out to get the ID token, access, assign message to inject the header in the appropriate place, and then we call into that same Cloud Run service URL. All right, the last is a little bit more involved. I call that indirect, and there's a number of steps here. So what's really happening is the API proxy is calling to Secret Manager. So to retrieve the service account key. So that is the service account key that we downloaded earlier and embedded into the Secret Manager. We uploaded it. Again, we're calling a googleapis.com endpoint, which means we need an access token. So this service callout is using an access token on behalf of the service account that the API proxy is running as. And we're getting this path, which is just accessing that service account key file. All right, so that's this step. Next step is to decode it. When it comes back, it's actually in a JSON, and the payload looks like payload, and then there's a subfield called data. So we need to extract that. We're using a JSON path to extract that, but that in itself is base64 encoded. So we want to decode that, and then finally, with that result, we have the service account JSON file itself. So this is the JSON that has, client email and private key and all those different fields. So we've decoded it. The next step is this another assign message policy, and that's what it's doing, is getting that JSON that we just decoded and performing a JSON path evaluation on that, getting the private key out, the client email, the token URI, all of which we need for the JWT, which is the next step. So the next step is generate a JWT. So we'll look at that. Standard generate JWT policy. We're going to use the private key that we just extracted to sign it. The issuer has to be what we just extracted. The audience has to be what we just extracted. The target audience is another claim in the JWT that we're going to create here. And that is, again, the cloud run service URL. It needs to expire in no more than 5 minutes. I put 2 minutes in here. And remember, this is not an ID token itself. This is just an assertion that we're going to send to what? To the OAuth endpoint to get an ID token. So we pass that assertion, that JWT that was just created in the prior step, with this grant type to what? To this token endpoint. And what that allows is me to get an ID token on behalf of the service account key file that we use to sign the payload. That's going to go in ID token response, and as in the prior step, we're going to extract from that the ID token response. We're going to apply a JSON path to get the ID token out of that, inject it into the authorization header, and that'll serve to satisfy the upstream Cloud Run service, that authorization header. So as you can see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps that we had to perform in order to get the ID token that's suitable for the upstream. If you're going to be smart about it, all of this should be cached. You shouldn't be doing all these service callouts for every request. But I didn't want to do that because it sort of clutters the implementation and obscures the point of how you can do this. All right. So those are the 4 different approaches. Reviewing those 4 approaches are pass-through, platform, impersonation with the IAM credentials endpoint, or indirect with the signing of the assertion and then calling into the OAuth endpoint to get a new token. Those are the 4 different ways. What we're going to do is maybe flip over to my Apigee, and let me shrink this window so it shows up on the screen appropriately. And double check, yep, this import and deploy step has succeeded a long time ago, so we should see that now. That'll be here. That is my API proxy. And if we step in or open up this thing, this is just basically the configuration that I just showed you. The proxy endpoint doesn't do anything. There's 4 target endpoints, and the interesting maybe the platform one is that one with the markup, and maybe the most interesting one is this indirect one that does those 6 steps. All right, it's deployed. So let's start a debug session. And then we'll flip back over to the README, which shows how to invoke these different scenarios. So the first one is using pass-through. So what I want to do is get an ID token, as I did before. It's just going to be a JWT, and then use that ID token in the authorization header and also pass this auth type thing. So we're not invoking the Cloud Run service directly. Now we're invoking it via the Apigee proxy that's been deployed. And we should see, what we expect to see is the ID token that gets sent to the Cloud Run service. Remember, it's the same Cloud Run service. It's just proxied by Apigee. So that's the thing that's identifying the Cloud Run service that we hit. And this is the thing that's identifying the caller, the information that was in the ID token that was passed in. So that's me, which is as expected. So that's working great. Next step is the platform authentication. And what do we expect to see here? So let's flip back over and we'll clear. The next one we're going to invoke with the platform header. And you can see I'm getting a call, that response that says, oh, we've got a different identity that's reaching that Cloud Run service. This is the email for the service account that the Apigee proxy was deployed as. So you can notice that that's different. So that works. Let's now try the third approach, impersonation. So we'll copy that command, flip back here, and we can see this one now is the same service account identity that's reaching Cloud Run, but it's obtained in a different way. The identity token was just obtained in a different way, and I think I showed you that in the target. So we'll flip now to the last option, and that is the indirect with the 6 steps. Grab that, invoke that, and that also works. But you can notice that this is a different service account. It is now a service account that belongs to a different project from the one that runs Apigee, and a different sub. So the 6 steps allows us to get an identity token for different service account. All right, so that kind of covers what I wanted to cover, and you can explore this API proxy and kind of morph it to suit your purposes and your experiments. You can do this all yourself. There's also a cleanup script. I won't show that running, but that'll tear everything down. I hope this has been helpful in clarifying the different options that allow you to invoke Cloud Run services in an authenticated manner from an Apigee API proxy. Till next time, keep it digital.